Before I tell you this story, let me warn you. What you're about to hear is not just another war tale. It's the kind of story that grips you by the throat and won't let go. The kind of story that makes you ask yourself what you would do if everything you believed in was collapsing around you and the only hope left was someone you never expected. So if you're ready to be pulled into the kind of ride that USA and UK audiences are talking about long after the credits roll, hit that subscribe button now, because what comes next will shake you, break you, and rebuild you in ways you can't imagine. This is the story of the day the Navy SEALs surrendered, until she came over the hill in a tank. It began in the dust and heat of a nameless valley, a stretch of hostile ground where even the shadows seemed to carry rifles, and where the mission that had started with flawless precision was collapsing like a house of cards kicked over by fate, and the SEAL team, 12 hardened men who had faced impossible odds before, suddenly found themselves cut off, betrayed, and staring at a horizon filled with enemies. They had moved in under the cover of darkness, a surgical strike meant to extract a high-value target who carried secrets that could ignite entire regions. But as dawn bled across the ridges, the team realized they weren't hunters anymore. They were prey, surrounded by hostile fighters who knew their every step, as if someone on the inside had whispered the mission into the wrong ears. Gunfire cracked. Mortars rained down. Comms were scrambled until their radios carried nothing but static, and by the time they regrouped in a half-collapsed farmhouse, 4 of their brothers were already down, 2 wounded and bleeding out, and the grim reality began to sink in, that surrender wasn't a coward's option anymore. It was survival, but survival felt like failure to men trained to never quit. Still, they laid down their rifles one by one, a ritual of humiliation under the gaze of enemy gunmen who jeered and filmed the spectacle on battered phones, knowing propaganda value when they saw it, and as the SEALs were marched away, zip-tied, and stripped of armor, Captain Reynolds, the man who had carried his team through Afghanistan, Iraq, and a dozen Black Ops missions no one would ever read about, felt a weight on his chest heavier than any bulletproof vest, the weight of broken trust, of soldiers who had given everything and now had nothing because someone somewhere had sold them out. Days bled into nights inside a makeshift prison camp carved into the valley cliffs, where the air stank of sweat, fear, and gasoline, and the enemy played mind games, blasting propaganda through rusted loudspeakers, promising the SEALs that America had abandoned them, that no one was coming, that they were already ghosts in their homeland. And the men, chained and beaten, began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the voices were right, because every rescue attempt seemed impossible. Every signal jammed, every plan smothered in the womb. Captain Reynolds tried to keep their morale alive with stories, with memories, with drills whispered in the dark, but morale is a fragile flame, and the darkness is greedy, and slowly, one by one, even the toughest operators began to break, staring at their boots, whispering prayers to God or cursing him outright. Then came the day when the enemy dragged them out into the blinding sunlight, lined them up in front of cameras, and demanded a filmed confession, a declaration of surrender, not just as men, but as symbols of American might, and the cameras rolled, and the world would soon see warriors with their heads bowed, and maybe they would think the SEALs were defeated. But in that moment, in the silence before the words were forced from their mouths, there was something else moving in the distance, something none of them expected, something that would change the meaning of surrender forever, because over the ridge, where heat shimmered and dust clouds swirled, came the sound, the metallic growl of gears, the thunder of tracks crushing stone, the unmistakable voice of a machine built for war, and, though they didn't know it yet, salvation had a new face, and she was about to drive straight into legend. As the SEALs stood broken in the dust, their wrists raw from bindings and their spirits sinking under the jeers of their captors, the rumble from beyond the hill grew louder until even the enemy fighters turned their heads, confusion spreading like wildfire through their ranks. And then through the haze of heat came a tank, an old beast of steel, scarred from battles long forgotten, yet alive with power. And on top of it stood a figure none of the men had expected. A woman, helmet tilted back, her eyes burning with a fury sharper than any blade. And as the tank rolled forward crushing, the enemy's makeshift barricades, panic erupted. Captors who had moments ago gloated over their prisoners now scrambled for cover, some firing wildly, others dropping their weapons, while the SEALs watched in stunned silence, their despair cracking open into the first fragile spark of hope. She didn't wait for permission, didn't wait for backup. She simply unleashed hell, the tank's cannon roaring, machine guns spitting fire until the valley itself shook with the echo of defiance. And Captain Reynolds realized this wasn't just a rescue. This was a statement that surrender was never the end, only the pause before someone brave enough rewrote the ending.
The battlefield was chaos now, smoke curling through the valley as the tank carved its path like an avenging beast. And in the middle of it all, the SEALs, still bound and battered, tried to make sense of the impossible. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why would anyone risk so much for men already written off as lost? Captain Reynolds caught a glimpse of her face as the turret swung. And it wasn't the face of some stranger, but of someone he vaguely remembered from a mission years ago. A combat engineer who had vanished from the ranks after being declared unfit for duty. And yet here she was, commanding steel and fury like a general from another age. With every shot, every blast, she bought seconds for the SEALs to cut their restraints on jagged rocks, and the men who only hours ago had believed themselves forgotten now felt their blood ignite again, their training flooding back, their will to fight clawing its way out of despair. Rifles were seized from fallen guards, formations snapped back into muscle memory, and together with the tank, they began turning the valley from a prison into a killing ground. The balance shifting in ways the enemy hadn't anticipated, because surrender had been their weapon, but resurrection was about to become the SEALs' answer. By the time the sun dipped behind the jagged hills, the valley was unrecognizable. Where once the SEALs had stood humiliated with their hands bound, now they stood armed again, shoulder to shoulder with the woman who had saved them. The broken prisoners turned back into warriors. The enemy, shattered and scattered, left weapons and bodies behind as they fled. Their propaganda dream burned to ash under the roar of a single tank. Captain Reynolds, bruised and bloodied, looked at her and finally asked the question burning in every man's chest, why? And she answered not with grand speeches, but with a quiet conviction, saying that no soldier, no brother, no ally deserved to be abandoned, not while she still drew breath. The SEALs knew then that they hadn't just been rescued. They had been reminded of what courage looked like when the world gave up hope. And as the last echoes of gunfire faded, they swore silently that history would never forget the day they surrendered, only to rise again because she came over the hill in a tank, rewriting defeat into legend. ***********.